AIs are enabling for disruptive forces in the marketplace, and either you're the one that's harnessing that AI to accomplish that, or somebody else will be.
Welcome to the MMC Ventures podcast. We're going beyond the hype in artificial intelligence. A warm welcome to listeners. I'm David Kellner, partner and head of research at MMC Ventures, the insight-led venture capital firm based in London. In this 6-part series, we'll be hearing deep insights from some of the world's leading AI technologists, entrepreneurs and corporate executives, while keeping things accessible for the non-specialist. I think AI is today's most important enabling technology, but it's not easy to separate fact from fiction. My goal for this series is for us to come away better informed about the reality of AI today, what's to come, and how to take advantage. Today's episode comes from the Big Apple. I'm in New York to speak with Rob High, Vice President at IBM and Chief Technology Officer of IBM Watson, the AI offering from IBM. IBM Watson has a special place in the history of AI. An AI system originally developed to answer questions on the US quiz show Jeopardy. In 2011, Watson beat 2 long-standing winners to claim first place. Since that time, Watson's capabilities have expanded to offer a variety of commercial applications. In 2014, IBM announced it was creating a business unit around Watson, and since that time, Watson's capabilities and the breadth of sectors with which it engages has grown enormously. Listeners may be interested to know that Watson wasn't named after Sherlock Holmes' faithful colleague and friend Dr. Watson, as I'd was assumed, but after IBM's first CEO, industrialist Thomas J. Watson. I'm excited to talk today with Rob to better understand IBM's AI platform, the adoption and implications of AI, and the likely evolution of AI technology. It's a genuine privilege to speak with Rob today. As an IBM Fellow, Vice President and CTO at IBM Watson, Rob is responsible for driving IBM's AI thought leadership and technical strategy. He works across the Watson research, engineering and development teams at IBM to drive collaboration and results. Prior to joining the Watson team, Rob was Chief Architect for the Service-Oriented Architecture, or SOA, Foundation. SOA is a big step forward in helping IT organizations meet increasingly complicated challenges. As well as championing SOA, Rob ensured that IBM's software and services were designed with SOA in mind. His responsibilities extended across the IBM software portfolio, including IBM WebSphere, Rational, Tivoli, Lotus, and more. Rob has nearly 40 years of programming experience and previously served as Chief Architect for the WebSphere Foundation. Rob, thank you for taking the time out on this Valentine's Day, no less, to speak with me.
Indeed. Thank you, David.
This series is sponsored by Barclays. I asked Barclays for a strapline they'd like to include as sponsor, and I thought their response was really interesting. Quote, "Thanks, but I'm not sure about slogans. Here's just how we think about AI. We think AI is incredibly important, a whole new field that's as significant as anything that's gone before. We think AI is vital to our business, and we're working hard to take advantage of it for our customers. And we need to learn from and collaborate with a wide range of people to ensure success. Technology advances fastest not when it's held close, but when people get out, listen, and contribute." I thought that was better than any slogan, so I asked if we might run with that. I have pleasure in doing so. Rob, could I start with a philosophical question? In a recent presentation, you said that AI is, quote, "not about replicating the human mind. Cognitive systems are about amplifying human cognition." What did you mean by that?
Well, I think that, we have a history in sort of the human world of creating tools. And most of the useful tools that we've ever created are ones that had this effect of amplifying our strength or extending our reach. And that's really the way that we want to think about AI as well. In fact, I even refer to it as augmented intelligence specifically to bring that point out, that this is really about picking up from where humans kind of leave off, but specifically with an eye towards how it can collaborate with humans to make humans better.
Let's find out a bit more about IBM Watson.
Mm-hmm.
I think of IBM Watson as a set of developer solutions, software in the cloud that developers can call upon to incorporate AI capabilities into their own solutions. Is that an appropriate description, or should I be thinking about this differently?
After many years of having, built solutions using this AI technology to solve really pretty meaningful problems, I think we came to the conclusion that there were more problems to solve than we could possibly ever solve on our own. And this idea of AI really was bigger than us as a company. And that the only way that we could really move forward was to kind of change our own thinking about what this stuff is and focus more on how to create a set of building blocks to enable other people to go create this solution. So today, Watson is mostly a collection, as he said, of a set of services. Each service is designed to address some particular aspect of the human experience, the human condition, whether that is recognizing objects within images, whether that is recognizing, speech and the words that are represented within that speech, whether that's looking at language and understanding what is being said in that language. So these building blocks are each tasked to perform some particular thing that has relevance in our human condition. And then people can take those, assemble them, and create their own solutions from it. They can create their own answers to solving for the kinds of questions people ask in the legal industry or in the healthcare industry or in the financial services industry. They can find ways of engaging people that are relevant to those domains and those disciplines, and do that without us, being a bottleneck in accomplishing that.
You segment your solutions into so-called discovery, computer vision, and perhaps if I could group some of them together, language services. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us about the kind of goals and capabilities of each of those three areas?
Yeah. And in fact, actually, I tend to group them around what I call foundational cognitive skills, which are largely recognition skills, visual recognition, as you said, speech recognition, language recognition. And then the other category is higher reasoning skills, which includes discovery, but it also includes things like conversations and some other things that we have in mind that will be coming out later. I think the major distinction between those are, the recognition skills are largely about taking something and understanding or recognizing. When I say understanding here, I don't mean sort of understanding the semantics as much as I mean recognizing the syntax of what it is. Is this an image of a glass or a vase or a pitcher? Is this, a recording of, in somebody's speech, a set of words, or as he said, language, really trying to understand what makes up the language or how to translate that language or what kind of information is contained with it. The discovery or the higher order reasoning skills, those services are much more focused on things that we would normally associate in the human brain as being conscious thought processes, right? How do I reason about what this person really meant? Why did they ask that question? What do I do with the fact that they've asked that question to get behind what's really bothering them? Or in the area of discovery, how do I really reason about the knowledge that's contained within this literature to draw conclusions that would then result in somebody being inspired to go think about that differently?
Back to Watson specifically, other big competitors obviously offer some AI infrastructure and tools and kind of plug and play AI services. How do you seek to differentiate Watson specifically?
I actually don't see hardly anybody else spending as much time thinking about how to bring these higher reasoning skills into the mix. I don't see nearly as much focus by any of my competitors today on applying deeper reasoning to have the effect of amplifying human cognition. I think most of the other vendors out there today are concentrating a lot on the recognition tasks. They are presuming that people will figure out how to employ those recognition tasks in new and novel ways to bring value. Recognize also that we're very focused on how to bring value to enterprise organizations, knowing that enterprise organizations care a lot about the privacy of their data, protecting their data, and ensuring that their data remains theirs. So for all those reasons, I think, there is not only a much stronger focus on a class of problems that you won't necessarily find being addressed by other vendors, but also because of that, it draws us that much more towards the idea that the real value is going to come when we can enable professionals to new ideas, when we can enable their clients to new ideas, when we can enable a bank to change the relationship they have with their clients. Likewise, in the customer care and support arena, right? We're able to help those clients do things that, you're just not going to find, quote, in the consumer space, right? You're just not going to see that in your consumer applications.
How should we expect Watson's services to evolve in the future? Are you seeking to deepen the capabilities you have in existing areas? So, I mean, those kind of recognition layer, the computer vision and language layer, and the higher order reasoning above it, or broaden, I mean, kind of fundamentally broaden its capabilities to whole new areas, or a bit of both?
I think a little bit of both, but where we'll optimize our focus and attention around those things that bring advantage to our enterprise customers, that allow them to be better businesses. And I don't mean that just sort of incrementally better, because, our customers, our enterprise customers, are also facing a world where there's a lot of change occurring. There's a lot of transformation in how businesses operate, how they approach their marketplaces, how their relationship to their clients is formed and retained and grows. And so when we work with our clients and find places where they can sort of fundamentally transform their business and change their relationship to their marketplaces, that will identify for us where the need is and where to advance. But given all that, and given what I know about these businesses, I can tell you the thing that's going to make the most difference is customer engagement and deep reasoning.
IBM sometimes attracts some attention for marketing the potential of AI really extensively, perhaps to the point where it's difficult for expectations to be met. Do you think more realistic expectations need to be set?
Well, so one of the things that's hard to deal with in this topic is that we as human beings are very quick to extrapolate meaning into words that may or may not have been intended. And because this area of artificial intelligence is one that, already engages our minds, our human minds, around the notions of what we think of when we talk about intelligence. We think of ourselves, we think of our own intellectual capabilities. Then when we bring that same term into the narrative for what is being delivered, we immediately begin to presume that it also includes all these other things that we're intellectually quite good at, right? So go back to, the point that we made earlier about Watson for Jeopardy and its ability to take a question, understand the nature of that question, and then find literature that would support an answer for that question. There, it was only focusing on factoid-based answers whose very answer could be essentially a noun phrase put into a sentence. It's easy for us as humans to look at that and say, well, if I can answer that question, then it must be able to answer any kind of question. And we don't stop long enough to realize there's a difference between a factoid-based answer and a more descriptive answer. The difference between, what's the capital Texas, which demands, a factoid answer, Austin is the capital of Texas, versus a question like, what does it take to get insurance in the state of Virginia, which you cannot answer with a simple noun phrase, is not always obvious to people. So I do think that it's always useful for us to go back and clarify and make sure that people understand the intention of the words that we're making and subdue the tendency for people to extrapolate their own interpretation of that. But it is the nature of the problem domain that we're dealing with here that we're always going to be bumping up against people creating expectations based on their own interpretations. And it's a difficult problem to deal with. And it's one that I think deserves, more attention. But no, I don't think that it's a matter of anybody deliberately misleading anybody.
IBM has a vast professional services business. I imagine Watson's a powerful engine for driving professional services work as your colleagues help implement the kind of solutions you're describing. But is there a conflict there over time as AI-enabled services partly obviate the need for less sophisticated work to be undertaken? Will there be a conflict between automation and the deployment of large numbers of perhaps more junior professional services personnel over time, do you think?
That conflict isn't obvious to me. But more importantly, I think that, this transformation to AI isn't a, one and done. There's no sort of, let's go do an AI project, bringing in a bunch of consultants. They go build this thing and then they're going to leave and everything is better as a result of that. Even today, and forget about, consulting services on this, even for those institutions that are employing AI, the ones that are getting the best success are the ones that create with that project a team whose purpose essentially is to continue to enhance and evolve and improve that solution over time. You're really beginning a journey, and that journey has really no end. It's a journey about transformation. It's a journey about continuous change to improve, to enhance the experience, the relationship between people, and really the role that we've been talking about of AIs who can extend and amplify human cognition. And then I think even for those tasks that we perform that don't require a great deal of skill, that doesn't mean the person performing that task isn't capable of more skilled things. And oftentimes the skill that they require isn't, a brain transplant. What they need is just simply the opportunity to focus more on the creative side of their experience. Create new ideas, look at new perspectives, to, come back to the business with ideas that, maybe changes the nature of how the business is performed. And I don't mean that in a, big way. It could even be in small things. It could be even around something as simple as, is there a better way of solving for this customer's problem today? So I don't think of this as being about displacing people. I think about it displacing the chores and tasks that people perform to free those people up to go do something that's more powerful and interesting.
What's the biggest challenge that IBM Watson faces today?
Really, it's about context. So the way that we as humans understand each other is largely drawn or heavily drawn from the context that we share. And whether that's our historical context, knowledge that we have about each other, or perhaps even knowledge that we can simply presume each of us possess about even practical and common sense things, that allows us then to interact with each other more effectively, or it's the context in which that interaction is occurring. This room right now, is a context for us. The fact that we're in the same room, the fact that we can see each other, the fact that we're interacting with, a shared understanding of how warm it is in this room, or, the noises that we hear in the background, or the fact that the sun is setting, all these things are adding to at least the fabric of our conversation, and probably in some very subtle ways are also helping us understand each other. Things that perhaps listeners of this program may or may not benefit from because they're not also in this room. Or if they are, it's because they have conjured in their mind an image of what it must be like in this situation that you and I are in. That all adds to our ability to interact with each other. It adds to our ability to understand each other and to get value from the conversation that we're having with each other. It's hard to capture that context with enough, subtlety and clarity in a conversational system today to be something that we can employ. So there's more work that needs to be done in that space. There's more that we have to understand about how to create and recreate sort of an internal model representation of that context in the AI processing that we're performing in the system.
I'd like to move on and talk a bit about the adoption of AI technology. From what I see, most corporate executives have heard of AI, but how sophisticated, perhaps on a scale of 1 to 10, do you think most executives' understanding of AI is?
Well, as human beings, business executives have the same propensity to associate what they know about AI to the things they know about themselves and their own ability and their own cognitive and intellectual capabilities. And like all these other situations we've talked about, there's a danger in that because you can project into an AI an assumption about what it does based on what we assume it must be able to do from our own ability to do that, our own ability to intellectualize around spaces that today AIs don't really address. So there is a certain danger in that. I don't think that is a lack of knowledge about AI That's probably a lack of insight about ourselves as human beings and all the sophistication that we employ when we think. On the other hand, I think executives, more than just about anybody else, business executives more than anybody else, are not bounded by prior knowledge and therefore are able to imagine a range of possibilities that are quite useful when thinking about the use of AI. So there's a pro and con to this, but ultimately we don't know. Collectively, we don't know where this AI is going to be able to take us any more than, the people who introduced smartphones 10 years ago knew how this was going to impact society today. I think we're going to see the same effect, and it's going to take people who are willing, who are brave enough to allow their imagination to run wild, to try it, to see what can be done. And there's going to be successes. There's an opportunity to learn and now recalibrate for what is possible or to change our thinking about what's possible. That I would suggest that unless as a business person, you're already getting on that journey, you're going to find yourselves at a major disadvantage. Not just because you don't have what your competitors may already have, because you're behind the curve as well and not progressing that journey that they have already started on.
And pragmatically, when you're beginning those conversations with buyers, are they kind of at a 3 out of 10 in terms of perhaps, understanding maybe what deep learning is relative to machine learning, say, or more a 7 out of 10? I mean, just calibrate for me. Are you usually starting by explaining the basics, or do most folks have?
Well, let me put it this way. So, the prior era of computing arguably was about 70 years long. It began in the 40s with Alan Turing and then Jonathan von Neumann. And at the very beginning, there was sort of a lot understood about a very small set of things. And we employed the effects of that to great result, right? I mean, computing has enabled us to do things that just simply would not have been possible without. But there was, at the end of the day, a lot that we didn't know. And I think the same thing's true here too. So I'm not sure I could put it on a spectrum like that, because I think the spectrum itself is not well defined.
The spectrum is moving, the goalposts are moving.
Yeah.
Great.
I think we've got a huge journey ahead of us.
At IBM, you guys have a great perspective into many of the world's big companies. Where do you think we are in the adoption cycle of AI?
Oh, at the very beginning. There's a lot of really interesting work being done out there. And again, we talked about this before, the compounding effect of change. People are already getting profound results from the little bit that they've invested in. But, as a total percentage of the transformation that I expect we're going to see, we're still at the very beginning. The technology itself is going to evolve. Our understanding of the technology is going to evolve. The uses of that technology, the transformations that we can embark on, and the results of that transformation to the marketplaces that we serve. Those are huge journeys ahead of us.
And in terms of where most buyers are at, is it mostly innovators and kind of early adopters, or is AI kind of at the early part of the early mainstream?
No, I think that it's actually already at work in ways that we're not even fully aware of. The obvious examples of that is for recognition problems. We already have this pervasive diversity of voice assistants out there. Most people today have already begun to introduce at least chatbots. They may be relatively primitive, but they're nonetheless, fairly pervasive. The tooling has certainly matured. We've already recognized, we're at least one generation in on the methodology, the technique that we use for training. I can tell you it was only a couple of years ago where sort of the prevailing assumption was the right way to train these systems was to collect up all this training data, lots and lots of training data. And then, and only then, after having trained the system, do we begin to look at how to put it in production. Whereas today, and certainly with the advances that we made with neural nets, deep learning, and what we call transfer learning, we can now do much of that kind of basic training in the lab as a vendor. So that tooling technique has already gone through at least one generation of change and has become substantially easier to make use of. But because of that, now you're seeing this pervasive proliferation of at least those basic recognition capabilities all over the place. We have institutions now that are using visual recognition on their production lines to recognize when anomalies occur in the manufacturing process and to kick out those product that clearly visibly is not what it should be, or to classify. There's one institution now that's looking at classifying the attributes of apparel. So these kinds of things, there's lots and lots of examples of them.
Which sectors do you see leading in their adoption of AI, and where perhaps are people lagging?
Probably the leading one is in retail and customer support. And again, both in terms of conversational agents as well as in the purchasing cycle, as well as conversational agents in the support cycle. Already you're seeing chatbots surface through different messaging platforms, Twitter, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, Slack has become a very common place where these kind of chatbots surface. And so, and those are being employed heavily for customer support. It's very common for when somebody has a problem with a product, instead of going to your customer, to your enterprise website, to go to the Twitter account, right, for your institution and begin to tweet questions about the problems you're having or the issues that you need to get solved. And those are either supported by, humans at the other end, or more often they're being supported by a chatbot that is able to answer sort of the most common questions that people ask in that channel. So that is very, very common. And that, like I said, is just about any industry that has customer support for their products, are seeing that. Retail, of course, is benefiting from the sales cycle of things. And then beyond that, probably the next leading area, is financial services, just because the opportunity to make use of this technology is so great, but also because financial institutions tend to have a history in using, the close cousin that we call machine learning in their quantitative analytics. And because they've already been employing different quantitative analytic algorithms, and oftentimes as a machine learning algorithms, then it's not a big leap for them now to take the adjacent track of using deep learning and qualitative analytics to those cycles.
Are there any sectors you see where adoption of AI kind of feels like it's lagging a bit, but maybe shouldn't, where there's more opportunity?
Well, I won't call out any particular industries because I think this might get a little bit offensive to them, but there are a lot of industries who have deep-seated experts in those industries that don't like being introduced to the idea that maybe there's a better way of doing things. And so, they tend to be, they tend to put a lot of friction, a lot of resistance, which is an important thing to understand too, because a lot of times what this stuff comes down to is how you approach it. What kinds of, how do you introduce the idea to people who could benefit from it? And especially helping them recognize that this isn't about removing them from the decision cycle. This is not about eliminating humans in the loop. This is about how humans in the loop can do what they do in a more effectively. That's an important message for people to hear because it reduces some of the resistance that I think a lot of professionals who don't like having their professional expertise challenged, it allows them to open their mind a little bit more to the idea that there's something useful to them there that today they're just simply missing.
For executives who are listening to this and who recognize that AI could be valuable, but just aren't sure where to start in terms of its adoption, what first step would you recommend to them?
Well, I mean, the low hanging fruit, to use that metaphor here, is in conversational systems around support. Just, it's an easy one to enter into. In terms of this long tail curve that I was referring to, name me a support organization that doesn't have an FAQ, a frequently asked question, which by the definition represents the head of that long tail, and therefore is the first place to begin any kind of journey. It's easy to do. It's quick. It's reliable. It has tremendous economic benefits in terms of, let's go back to the call center, for example, call center agents. What are your biggest expenses? Of course, it's human labor, but it's also because, clients get very dissatisfied when what they have to deal with is sitting on hold for 15 minutes, when they have to get bounced around between different agents because they didn't land on the right one to begin with, when the agent makes up an answer. And then the second big cost there is agent churn. And why did agents turn? It's because they get dissatisfied with their own job. It's a really menial, arduous task sometimes to sit on the phone all day long with clients who oftentimes begin the conversation irate and upset because whatever it is they were trying to get done is being, held back because there's a problem with your product or there's an issue with your service. So, if you can change that dynamic, put a conversational agent in place to deal with that FAQ, it helps the client because their question is going to get solved very quickly, very consistently, 24 hours a day, right? They're, conversational agents, don't take naps. They don't need breaks. They just keep on answering those simple, basic questions, and they do it very quickly. And for the agent themselves, guess what? They get to go home at the end of the day feeling good about what they did that day. They got to work on some really challenging problems. They have the satisfaction of knowing they helped somebody in a really meaningful way. And that will reduce churn. So, we see these benefits all over the place economically from a fairly simple investment around using AI to solve for a very common problem.
Let's talk about the implications of AI. Let's take a step back. What implications for big companies do you think the adoption of AI technology will have over the next decade or two?
Well, the biggest one is it is going to enable change. And the reason that's important is because even if you as an institution decide you don't really want to pursue significant change, your competitors probably are, right? And if not your direct competitors, the ones you know about, every industry that we look at today is subject to disruption. There's going to be other players coming on to the scene, thinking about the business problem differently, changing the business model, changing the relationship with clients, changing the definition of the marketplace. And so, these changes are coming. AI enables those changes, but it also enables you to get advantage from those changes. And I think it comes down to something that we've all talked about many times, which is, either disrupt your marketplace or be disrupted. And I think that's an important point in all this, is that AIs are enabling for disruptive forces in the marketplace, and either you're the one that's harnessing that AI to accomplish that, or somebody else will be. So that's, it's a heads up, a little bit of a dire warning in that too, but also an opportunity.
Do you think the paradigm shift to AI is fundamentally different in some way from the last big paradigm shifts we saw to mobile and cloud computing, or is this just another, albeit very meaningful, technology cycle?
I think it's different because those were mostly about technology paradigms. They were about, how do we facilitate the delivery of computational technology in the form of cloud. It was disruptive and beneficial because it shortened the cycle time for creating and delivering value. In the case of mobile, it shortened the distance between the consumer and your value. This is going to change how people recognize value and the kinds of value that you can create. It has less to do with information technology as we traditionally think about it. It has more to do with business relationships, human relationships, and the expectations those relationships create to your institution. So I think it's a little bit more, is certainly different and is substantially more profound than the kinds of changes we saw with other technologically oriented transformations.
What do you think's most misunderstood about AI?
It's the idea that somehow we can replicate the human mind. We can't today. I'm very doubtful that we ever can. But even if we could, I don't think that we should. I don't think that, and it's not unethical. I mean, I think there may be an ethical point in that as well, but economically, it's not going to be useful.
Let's talk a little bit about AI technology. We hear a lot that training data is the lifeblood of AI, but to what extent are proprietary algorithms still sources of defensible value? Are there areas in which the problem really is less the data and more are the lack of sophistication in our algorithms?
I think that, we've seen a lot of focus deep learning, neural net technologies, especially convolutional neural nets here over the last 4 years or so. That's not the end of the road. There's going to be further advances, new techniques in the training approach, more emphasis on transfer learning. We've seen some, emphasis coming from DeepMind, for example, around reinforcement learning, unsupervised training techniques. I'm very suspicious of how far that could be taken, or I should say skeptical of how far that could be taken. In fact, I would argue that almost all of the examples of where it's been employed so far have been around problems that are relatively closed loop in nature. Games, for example, where, the outcome of the game is unambiguous. There's no doubt about who won or lost a given game. There's very, very well-defined sets of rules, a set of games that you could be tested. They don't require a great deal of judgment, generally speaking. And so we've seen success in reinforcement learning in those kinds of situations, but those don't really represent our everyday human experiences very well. Most of our human experiences more judgmental, qualitative, has to be tested under different circumstances. And so, there's no evidence yet to me that reinforcement learning is going to apply well to all those other experiences that humans get exposed to. But that said, I also think that the algorithms, the algorithmic technique and the methodologies for training are constantly evolving. We've got an enormous amount of research invested in discovering and challenging new algorithmic technique. I know that other institutions do as well, including a lot of academic institutions that are really testing the boundaries of different algorithmic technique. And I expect that over the course of the next 4 years, we're going to see another complete shift in what algorithms are preferred.
Deep learning has been a very fruitful approach to machine learning in recent years, as you've described. How close do you think we are to kind of maxing out results from deep learning, or is there still plenty of room to go there?
I think the deep learning itself has probably gotten sort of to the limits of its capability. Where there are a lot of advances going on right now with deep learning is in the variations of the parameters that we can put into deep learning, like, how many hidden layers, how many layers of pooling do we do? How do we fuse different results? And of course, how do we then, move into other forms of learning like transfer learning? I think the advances we're going to see in deep learning will be refinements in the underlying sophistication of these deep learning architectures and technologies, which, we may continue to refer to as deep learning, although it's really not convolutional neural nets anymore at that point. They're probably something else.
Particularly for AI that does use deep learning, explainability has been a real challenge, as obviously you'll be aware. We know that those algorithms kind of work well, but we don't always know how they arrive at their result. Do you think this explainability challenge will be solved in the medium term?
I think what we need to do for explainability is change the nature of what we're looking for. I'll give you a real gross example here, right? When I ask you a question and you give me an answer, I don't ask you to explain the neural structure, the neural pathways that you executed in coming to that conclusion. I don't think that we should do that for neural nets either. What we do expect of each other is to cite your evidence, right? What evidence did you draw on to come to that conclusion? I may ask you to explain the higher logic of your reasoning. So what axioms did you leverage? And where did you get those axioms from? What was the source of those? Why did you choose this axiom over another axiom? So I may ask for those kinds of things from you to explain your rationale and give me confidence in your answer. I may even test you a little bit, and we do this all the time subconsciously. We're not always aware of this. I may test you on your confidence in that answer. And we express that today in very subtle ways, like, how strong a voice do we use when asserting an answer? How quickly do we assert that answer? How much glow is there in our face when we gave that answer, versus, how much shiftiness was there in our eyes? So, confidence is an important factor. So confidence, citing references of evidence, identifying which algorithms and why we choose one algorithm or another, or axioms. Those are the things that we demand of each other. And that's usually sufficient because, frankly, even if you were to explain your neural structures and pathways that you took, I wouldn't know what the hell to do with that anyway. Right? It's just too, you get lost in the forest with that kind of information. And I think the same thing also applies here. We need to stop looking for neural networks to explain the inner workings of their neural structure and spend more time representing their confidence, identifying their sources of evidence, and maybe identifying their selection of axioms or which algorithm was leveraged over versus some other algorithm.
You express some, I don't think skepticism is the right word, but some awareness that, or some caution around the kind of limited scope for reinforcement learning. Mm-hmm. What technological development in the field of AI do you think will yield the next step change in capability then?
Well, there are some very promising advances occurring in, first of all, transfer learning, which I've already mentioned. That looks very interesting because it solves for the problem of how much data you need to get to where you need to be.
Forgive me, just for our listeners, could you just describe kind of transfer learning, how you think about that?
If I train, let's say, a language recognition system in a particular domain to recognize, all the words, the idioms, the abbreviations, the kinds of lexical characteristics we associate with the language of medicine, for example. I can't take that model and immediately apply it to engineering, but at least some portion of that model remains relevant. There's some subset of that model which is based on the same common roots of language that you might find in everyday vernacular, that you might find in everyday speech. What we call open domain language. So if I can take the model that I created for the healthcare industry around the language of medicine and subset that around what are the common roots of that might also be shared with the language of engineering, allows me to then take that model into the domain of engineering. And with only a little bit of training data, I can get that model now working well in engineering and that other discipline. It didn't have to start from scratch. I didn't have to teach it everything about the language that humans use to communicate.
You think this transfer learning could be kind of one of the key next breakthroughs?
There's a lot of, similarity between that and what humans do. As humans, first of all, and this also applies to the questions of where does reinforcement or unsupervised learning fit into the spectrum. Take every human being that you know and imagine what it'd be like if you put them out into the world, in the wild, without any benefit of being trained by somebody else, without any exposure to any kind of structured training technique, and think about what would you end up with? Would it be somebody who could communicate in your world? Is it somebody who could reason about the problems the way that are important to you? And the answer is probably not. We all have, at least in part, had the benefit of some structured educational process, supervised learning. And it began with very basic things, and we built it up from there. And with that laid a groundwork, laid a foundation that enables us then to both specialize and continue down one particular path towards a discipline, a domain that's important to our career, or to our growth, or to who we are as an individual and our identity. But it also kind of gives us a pretty good foundation for then adopting new knowledge and new disciplines of expertise in other domains. It's probably not unreasonable to assert that somebody who is well trained in, automobile mechanics can take that knowledge, that discipline, that expertise, and now transfer it into HVAC mechanics, into the mechanics of how, a building operates, for example. So I think there is similarity in the human world that we can draw on to inform how we think about training of AIs as well.
Before we finish with our quickfire round, I'd be interested to know the book you've read that's had perhaps the biggest impact on your life in recent years. Anything that will blow our hair back?
Actually, there's two of them that I'll cite, and one, and I'm going to struggle with the authors' names on both of these, but one was Turing's Cathedral, and the other one was Sapiens. Turing's Cathedral was really fascinating because it gave me a great deal of insight as to the history of our industry and its applicability to the problems that are being solved with, this idea that Alan Turing had, and how people like Jonathan van Neumann took that idea and shaped it, and the sort of the forces that motivated that construction. And I'll give you a quick point on this. Alan Turing and Jonathan van Neumann and most of the people that were there at the beginning of the computing, the procedural computing era, they were mathematicians. And when you realize that, what you begin to realize by extension is that what they built in a computer was a machine that could process mathematics. That's what a computer is. So, when Jonathan van Neumann made the statement that, computers will be able to answer as many questions as there are people to think of those questions, what was informing his thought there was the idea that if you can create a mathematical model to represent the problem you're trying to work on, then you use that model to reason about how that thing is going to work under different conditions, or how to answer questions about that problem. That's great if you can create that mathematical model. And certainly hard science,
but
economics
doesn't fit in that place.
Yeah, those things sort of, lend themselves well to mathematical modeling and creating precise understanding of how the world works when you have that mathematical to work with. But the rest of the world, the rest of our experience isn't that precise. And it doesn't lend itself to being modeled mathematically and grading any kind of real advantage, which is why we're in a different era. This is why the last era of computing is no longer directly relevant to what we're trying to do now in the world of AI. because everything in AI is about the rest of the problems that we have to deal with as human beings.
I'll finish, if I may, with our traditional quickfire round. Just 1 or 2 word answers only, please. Firstly, is the promise of AI overhyped?
It is misinterpreted in many ways.
In which sector do you think AI will have the most profound impact?
Retail, and then customer support to begin with. Over time, anywhere there is a human involved.
Do you think AI will destroy more jobs than it creates?
I think it's going to transform the nature of jobs, and it will eventually create more jobs, as we've seen with every other technology out there.
Should we worry a lot about autonomous weapon systems?
I think we should always be mindful of how people employ technologies in solving for their differences. There's potential for people to do things that perhaps they should think twice about. And hopefully at the end of the day, what it does is help protect us all.
Do you think we'll achieve an AI singularity at a time when perhaps more general AI triggers a period of unprecedented technological change? And if so, roughly when?
I think technology is going to have a profound impact on our society and the way that we address problems. I don't think there will ever be a time where, the idea that we implant machines in people's heads and that becomes the necessary prerequisite to survival is anything that is going to occur anytime soon. But I do think that people will get benefit from the symbiotic relationship that can occur between what we do and what machines can do to help us augment our strength, extend our reach.
And finally, should AI systems of sufficient intelligence ever have rights?
It's a hypothetical that I think, it presumes a lot about where this technology goes that I don't think is realistic. It's not something that we should have to worry about. And at the end of the day, the question is, what right are you really trying to address? So it's a hypothetical that I'm not sure is really meaningful at this point in time.
Rob, it's been a very genuine pleasure and privilege. Thanks so much for all of your insight today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, David.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of MMC Ventures Beyond the Hype podcast, presented in association with Barclays. Follow us on Twitter at MMC_Ventures and explore our research at mmcventures.com. Don't miss the final episode of this series, Quantum Leap, where Ilyas Khan KSG, co-founder and CEO of Cambridge Quantum Computing, provides an accessible introduction to quantum computing and describes how it will impact AI.
The impact of quantum computing is comparable to the impact of what happened at the Industrial Revolution